In a quiet hotel suite in California in the spring of 1979, an old woman lay dying, weighing barely more than a child. She had once been called the richest girl in the world. Her name had filled the front pages of every newspaper on 2 continents. She had owned palaces and jewels that had belonged to queens and had married 7 times into some of the most glamorous names on earth. And now, at the end, by many accounts, almost all of it was gone. The vast fortune, the mansions, the diamonds, spent, given away, or taken, until what remained was a fraction of a shadow of what she had begun with. This is the story of a girl who was handed one of the great fortunes of the century and spent her whole life discovering that it could buy everything except the one thing she was looking for. Because power and money are never far apart. Her name was Barbara Hutton, and the money came from a store you have almost certainly walked into. Her grandfather was a man named Frank Woolworth, and he had built something that changed how ordinary people shopped. He opened stores where everything was cheap and everything was in reach, where a person of modest means could walk in and buy small treasures for a nickel or a dime. He spread these stores across the country and then across the world, thousands of them. And in doing so, he assembled an enormous fortune out of the smallest of coins. He had built a monument to the pennies of the poor, and that monument would one day fall on the shoulders of a little girl who never asked for it. Because Barbara's childhood, despite the money, was steeped in sorrow from the very beginning. When she was only a small child, her mother died suddenly, in circumstances the family kept clouded and painful, and the loss marked her in a way she never escaped. Her father, distant and busy, largely handed her off to relatives, to servants, to a rotating cast of adults paid to be there. She grew up in enormous houses, surrounded by every comfort money could arrange, and profoundly, achingly, alone. The one thing all that wealth could not purchase for her was the simplest thing a child needs: to feel wanted, and that hunger, never filled, would shape every choice she made for the rest of her life. When she came of age and the fortune became hers, the world reacted the way the world does to sudden money in young hands. It descended on her. She was thrust into society with a debut so lavish it drew public anger, staged in the depths of a Great Depression, when millions had nothing. And here was a young girl spending a sum on a single party that a working family could not have earned in many lifetimes. The newspapers turned on her, casting her as a symbol of everything careless about the very rich. And so, still barely more than a girl, she learned another cruel lesson: that the money made her a target, watched, resented, and pursued long before she had any wisdom to protect herself. And pursued she was. Here we arrive at the heart of her tragedy, the 7 marriages that made her famous and emptied her, one husband at a time. Again and again, she was drawn to charming, titled, glamorous men, princes and barons and stars. And again, many of them proved far more interested in her fortune than in her heart. Several of these husbands, by numerous accounts, took enormous sums from her in settlements, in gifts, in the simple daily draining of a bank account by a man who had married a checkbook. She would give, desperate to be loved, and they would take. And the marriage would collapse. And she would be left poorer, sadder, and more certain than ever that she could not tell the difference between affection and appetite. There was, the story goes, one exception. One of her husbands was a famous and beloved actor, a man already wealthy and successful in his own right, who reportedly refused to take a single dollar of her money. For a brief moment, she seemed to have found someone who wanted her and not her fortune. But even that marriage did not last, and the pattern reasserted itself: the titles and the charm and the quiet, steady disappearance of the money. Each husband was a hope, Each divorce was a withdrawal from her fortune and from whatever was left of her faith in people. And the spending was not only on husbands. Barbara gave money away with both hands to friends, to hangers-on, to anyone with a sad story and an open palm. She tipped in amounts that could change a stranger's life. She bought jewels of staggering historical value, pieces that had adorned royalty, and then sometimes sold them at a loss when she needed cash. She kept entourages, paid for the lives of people around her, and lived in the grand hotels of the world while her wealth bled steadily away. She was generous and reckless and profoundly unwell, and the fortune that had taken her grandfather a lifetime to build was being scattered across the world faster than anyone around her seemed willing to stop. And then came the loss that broke whatever was still whole in her. She had one child, a son, and he was, by all accounts, the great love of her life, the one relationship untainted by money. In 1972, he was killed in an aircraft accident. For a mother who had spent her entire life starved of real connection and who had finally found it in her own child, the loss was beyond bearing. In the years that followed, her health, already fragile, collapsed. She withdrew from the world. And in that quiet hotel suite a few years later, the richest girl in the world came to the end of a life that all her money had somehow failed to save. Now, in fairness, the picture is more complicated than the tragic legend, and honesty demands we say so. Some who study her life argue that the popular image of her dying in total poverty is exaggerated, that there were still assets and trusts, and that the tabloids, which had tormented her since childhood, sharpened the ending into a cleaner morality tale than the truth quite supports. She was also, by many accounts, genuinely kind, intelligent, a writer of poetry, a woman of real feeling crushed under a fame she never chose. She was not simply a foolish heiress who wasted a fortune. She was a lonely, wounded person handed an amount of money that attracted every kind of person except the kind she actually needed. And that is the uncomfortable lesson buried in her jewels. We look at someone born into that much wealth, and we assume they must be the luckiest person alive, that such a fortune must surely mean happiness, security, a life without pain. Barbara Hutton had more money as a child than most of us will see in 100 lifetimes, and it bought her loneliness, predators, and grief. The wealth did not protect her. It painted a target on her from the day she was born. The same quiet truth haunts the heirs and lottery winners and sudden fortunes of our own time, the people we envy from a distance, never guessing what the money is quietly costing them. Barbara Hutton learned it early and spent a lifetime and a fortune proving it, because power and money are never far apart. Discovery continues.